This is Live from the Table, a Comedy Cellar affiliated podcast. Coming at you on Sirius 99 XM Raw Dog and the Laugh Button Podcast Network. This is Dan Naturman here with Noam Dworman, owner of the world famous Comedy Cellar.
Present.
And Periel Aschenbrand, who is our producer slash booker, whatever you want to call her. And of course, Nicole Lyons behind the scenes, the sound engineer, second to none in the business. Hello, everybody. It is, as we record, the 5th of October. It is Yom Kippur, and I have been fasting since last night at approximately 6 p.m. I have about an hour and a half to go. It hasn't been too bad, but yeah, so I am hungry, but
have you given any thought to what you're going to break the fast with?
Well, I'll probably break it here at the Comedy Cellar because I happen to be here. Now the question becomes, what should I order? And I was thinking maybe a cheeseburger with no bun to try it. Well, what's worse health-wise? I've been trying to figure this out. Is red meat worse than like white bread? I mean, I hear all kinds of horrible shit about white bread, and then red meat. Like people, I don't know. I've never read anything that said white bread was anything but awful. Red meat, there seems to be some difference of opinion on the matter.
I think white bread has no countervailing nutritious benefit. Red meat, I think, actually is a good source of a lot of things that you need. But in moderation, they're probably both fine. People go crazy about this stuff. Cheeseburger is kind of a spiteful way to end.
You're right, because for those who don't realize,
ease into it.
Cheeseburger is not kosher. But I'm not kosher. The only thing I do, the only thing I do of a Jewish nature,
you sleep with chicks.
The only thing I do is fast. I don't do anything else Jewish. I'm not good with money. I don't celebrate holidays. I look Jewish and I fast on Yom Kippur.
You know, you kind of glaze over that not good with money. I don't think the accusation is that we're good with money. I think the accusation is that we're tight with money. And I believe you might have a...
You think I might have a tendency toward that? I don't know. Ask the waitstaff about my tipping, and I think you'll find that they would agree that I'm probably one of the more generous tippers. Now, you might argue I'm only doing it to be well thought of, but why does anybody do anything? but I tip. I eat free here, and I generally tip $12 on a free meal.
And 33 cents.
10 to 12, depending on my moods. And then if they get me a drink, I'll give them another $5.
Oh, that's nice. Too. That's a lot.
And not just to the women, but to the men as well. So it's not just a sexual thing.
Impressive.
So I don't know that there's much evidence of me being tight with $1. Anyway.
Wait, do you tip like that in other places also?
I tip decently in other places.
Decently, but not as well.
Well, I work here. These are my friends, or at least my colleagues, or at least people I see all the time. So I'm going to tip more. Plus, I eat for free, so I feel an extra reason to tip more. At a normal establishment, I'll tip. First of all, tipping used to be 15%. Somehow it became
Here we go.
Somehow it became 18%.
20.
As a minimum. I don't know how that happened. But I do that. I'm just wondering how 15% became 18%. And now everybody, and now you have tip jars everywhere. Now, I used to work at an ice cream parlor and there were no tip jars. We got paid, but we got paid. Now there's tip jars everywhere. And I typically will put money in those as well.
It's worse than that, Dan. We're all victims of a mass psychological framing effect experiment, because now anytime you tip, you pay on some sort of LED screen, they give you 3 options, right?
Yeah.
It could be 15, 18, 20, 22, 25, 27, 30. I picked the middle option, right? I don't want to be the cheap. I don't want to be the guy who chooses a lower option. Whatever they put in the middle, I'm going to choose just to not make waves. But it's ridiculous. And I notice sometimes they'll have the lowest option is 15%. So that's great. I can 18%, but if the top option is over 20, it's right.
Yeah.
It's ingenious.
I like how the segue into this was, I'm not that Jewish.
Who, me?
No, all of it.
Oh no, I you know me. I don't even pay attention to what the money I'm spending. That's what I'm saying. I don't even know what it is. I just hit the middle.
I do want to tell you that I don't fast, but you're supposed to break the fast with something like much lighter than that, like a broth, because you don't want to get.
We don't have broth here at the Comedy Cellar. We have a lentil soup. That's sort of a very
You
thick.
can
But
get some broth across the street.
It's like I guess
won't
I
be
could
free.
Go I go to the pho place, the
Yeah.
Thai place,
The
but
Vietnamese place is so
Thai is a
good.
bit spicy for a break. Usually people break
No.
the fast with like bagels and lox, but we don't have that here.
No, the Saigon Shack,
I may do that. We'll see. All things
the
are
Deer Hunter Cafe.
all
across
things
the
are
street.
possible. All
It's
things
so
are
good there.
possible.
My God.
Now, was it a meaningful fast? People always say you have a
no,
hopefully have a
and
meaningful
I don't
fast.
even think the logic behind it is sound. You're supposed to fast not to punish yourself, which would make some sense because it's a day of atonement. From what I've read and from what I've heard, you fast in order to focus on prayer and atonement. I don't know how being hungry helps you focus. Being hungry helps you focus on your hunger. I don't know. I mean, I don't see the logic to it.
Are you atoning? Do you feel like you have something to atone for?
I don't worry about the atonement. All I do is fast. I don't go to synagogue. I don't pray, and I don't atone.
I think you're missing the point.
The point is if the idea to fast if the logic is it helps you focus rather than be distracted, it seems to have the opposite effect because you're thinking about food the whole day.
If God were going to prioritize the things He wants you to do, I don't think fasting would be. I think it'd be like atonement, prayer,
maybe.
Blah blah blah.
So
blah,
then
blah,
your question
fast.
is, why do I fast? I think it's a good exercise anyway, because, well, first of all, I've been intermittent fasting of late, but that's another story. I think it's a good idea to deprive yourself in a world where so many people are deprived.
In a world,
to deprive oneself of food gives you perhaps ever so slightly a little bit of insight into what it might be to not have everything you want all the time whenever you want it, and maybe can make you a somewhat better person that way. So that to me is why I do it. There is also tradition for, it's but you could say tradition would be doing the other things as well. That's how I choose to. That's what I choose to do. Everybody chooses and picks and chooses. Noam chose to have his children converted to Judaism not against their will, but they were children. That's
without their consent.
That's what he chose to do. He could have married a Jewish woman. He didn't do that. So everybody does.
She's basically.
I atoned.
Everybody does.
I'm atoning every day.
Is there in all religions? I think. Like take our friend Nicole, who I guess grew up Catholic or Protestant or one of those things.
Yeah, Catholic Christian.
So I mean, you probably do one or two things of a religious nature.
Not so much anymore. We used to, be the kind of Christians that went to church once a year.
There you go. Once a year.
Besides the virgin thing, what do you do, Nicole?
Yeah, I can assure you that's not a problem for me. But yeah, I'm really not doing anything. I think sometimes I'll do.
I can assure you. Take it easy, Nicole. I don't do anything.
What do you mean? You do all the holidays?
Juanita does them. I grew up in a home.
But you had your kids converted, so you did
and
something.
You send your kids to Hebrew school.
Yeah, I had the kids converted because I wanted them to be able to if they do connect with essentially their ethnicity. I want them to have the technicality so that they don't have severe cognitive dissonance, so that they can say they're Jewish. But I was raised in, it's such an extremely Jewish conscious home, and we didn't do one single religious thing. We didn't, Yom Kippur, nothing. I never went to shul with my father one day in my entire life.
So here's the thing, though. I think that when your dad was Israeli,
yes.
So I think that when it's so inherent in who you are, you don't have to, or you don't feel like you have to do those things because those things are self-evident. When you grow up without those things, I think you try to do those things like you do all the holidays.
Yeah, but we never did them in my house.
Right, but you do them in
Passover sometimes.
You do them now.
Yeah, that was really, God bless her. That was really Juanita's thing. She went to figure out how to do all those holidays, and I'm happy we do them, but we never did them in my house growing up.
No, quickly, could I
Yeah.
just segue rather brusquely? I just wanted to mention that I was listening to every Monday night they do music here at the Comedy Cellar at the Olive Tree Cafe, which is the restaurant above the Comedy Cellar. Not everybody that's listening has been here, I guess. But every Monday, Noam and his boys play music. And I was sitting with Stephanie Spindle, who is one of our she just hangs out here, but she does production work anyway. A friend of mine, whatever. But she pointed out, she goes, look at Noam. You were playing, I forgot what song you were playing. Look how happy he is. I looked over and I saw a look of joy in your face playing guitar that your average 6-year-old would be hard pressed to obtain this level of pleasure. And certainly not a man in his 6th decade of life. You seldom see that level of unbridled joy that playing music brings to you, that expression on your face.
I'm in my 7th decade.
7th decade. Well, okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess so.
Yeah.
But for the mathematically uninclined, that doesn't mean he's 70.
Yeah.
That means he's 60, but he's in the 7th.
That would have confused.
But
me.
anyway, I think it's amazing. I mean, you seldom see that level of enthusiasm. As you get older, that childlike joy tends to leave you. I know I'm playing music.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, Dan. I mean, I guess it's a compliment. I don't know. Yeah, it hasn't left me. not even a little bit. But I don't think that's unique to musicians. I think most musicians continue to get. Look at Paul McCartney. He's 80. He doesn't need the money.
Yeah, but the look on
Mick
your face
Jagger.
was that of a child at a eating, at a county fair or something. I mean, it was like a.
Yeah, well, I'm really enjoying the Olive Tree music because the level is so high. The people I'm playing with are so friggin' good. And now Sasha, who's sings with the Rolling Stones, is coming down every week, and it's just it's amazing to be able to play with such good musicians.
And that new discovery of yours, Miranda,
Yeah,
who kind of amazing, I think. I mean,
Periel hasn't seen her.
You've often pointed out that Noam doesn't bring that same enthusiasm to the podcast.
that is true. Yes, I have made that observation. I think it's rather striking. But that'll, if anything keeps you young. I know, Noam, you're eating healthier now, and you're a little bit more focused on your health and longevity than you had been, and as one would imagine. Perhaps that's the key to Fountain of Youth. Perhaps to find something you enjoy. I mean, there have been studies that show that if you're engaged in life, that can have a health effects and.
Well, I don't know. Knock on wood. I will acknowledge it. You're not supposed to say these things out loud.
So don't.
Yeah.
Just say that you're enjoying the podcast too.
Well, I think what Noam was trying to say is his numbers are good.
No, it's not just my numbers are good. I feel, now maybe this is typical of people my age, I don't know. But I feel exactly the same as I did when I was ever. Like I don't feel any different than I think I did in my 20s. I just feel exactly the same.
That's
well,
amazing.
it's also somewhat gradual. So, for example, you might not notice that if you have a couple of drinks, you don't wake up the next morning quite as free of effects.
That's probably true. But I mean, just like if I run up, we have a big steep hill in my backyard, and I will run up the hill ahead of my kids. Like, Daddy, I can't. I'm like, I'm just running up the hill. I'm good.
Well, I was never in shape, so I didn't have. So I probably am in better shape than I was because I actually go to the gym regularly now, which I didn't do at that age. I think we have our guest. Is that correct? Is Jamie here?
Jamie Kirchick.
Sounds like the doorbell has rung.
Oh, hello.
There he is.
James.
What a nice background you have.
We're stepping up our game, James.
I think Nicole, our engineer, did that. Not Jewish, by the way.
James is
Very impressive.
is making, I think, his 2nd appearance with us, or maybe his 3rd. He's an American reporter, foreign correspondent, author, and columnist, and his most book, Secret City, is a New York Times bestseller. How do you like that? Please welcome Jamie Kirchick to the shoe. Hello, Jamie.
That's a cool door you have on. I guess that's your right side there. I don't know if this camera's flipped or not. Is that like that's beautiful. Did you install that?
It's like a barn door. Yeah, it's very nice. It can slide open, and I have one in my bedroom as well.
That's I would we're redoing my bedroom now. When I say we, I mean my wife, and she's putting a pocket door. But that would be even better. Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jamie, congratulations on the book. Congratulations on it being a bestseller. Why don't you just go ahead, tell the audience what the book's about?
It is about what was in the 20th century, I believe, the worst and most dangerous secret you could have in American politics, which is being gay. Worse even than being a communist, because a communist could become an ex-communist, whereas a homosexual was forever tainted and your career would be over. Not just in politics, but the CIA, the State Department, working in the federal government in any capacity. And so my book begins with FDR in the New Deal in the 1930s, and it goes all the way to Bill Clinton, through every presidential administration. Lots of familiar faces, J. Edgar Hoover, Roy Cohn, Jackie Kennedy, gay and straight people, obviously, telling the stories of all these figures and how homosexuality impacted everything from World War II to the CIA, to the FBI, to McCarthyism, to the civil rights movement, to the Reagans and AIDS. And it's a real, it's an epic book.
Now before you tell us some of these some good anecdotes, how do you research a book like this?
So there were multiple levels. One was I just had to read sort of any secondary sources I could get my hands on, and that means books and magazines and newspaper articles. There are hardly any books written about this, which is really why I decided to write a book myself. But when I say, I was reading presidential biographies and just kind of looking for that maybe one page or two, right, where it mentioned like the gay friend or the gay scandal that happened in like the Roosevelt administration, right? And that kind of gave me a broad overview of what I would need to cover. And then I would start looking at paper collections. So lots of presidential libraries, the papers of various advisors or the presidents themselves. Ben Bradley's papers, I found a great story. The
He was the editor of the Washington Post. He was a Washington Post.
Executive editor, beginning in the late 60s through Watergate all the way to the 90s. So paper collections, classified documents. I had a lot of government documents, declassified, FBI, State Department documents, Civil Service Commission, which was basically the main body that employed federal employees. And so they were doing a lot of these background investigations, hunting down gay people and expelling them and whatnot. And then there were a lot of interviews. I interviewed a lot of folks, former government officials, employees, journalists and whatnot, congressmen. It took a lot of work. I mean, I was working on this book, on and off for about 10 years.
Wow.
Well, this is a tremendous thing you've done. I mean, in a certain way, it's kind of like similar to when we talk about so much Jewish stuff, but just the first thing pops to mind, like when Israel began to re-examine its like War of Independence and Benny Morris and stuff like that, like just uncovering all this information that's kind of out there, but nobody wants to talk about it. It only, we're ready for it now. Now we're kind of ready for all this information, and you're doing the groundbreaking, archaeological work, right? Is that the right word for it?
That's a good, that's a good analogy. I mean, because this was as I said, this is the most terrible thing you could be. It's called Secret City. This was the worst secret. And one of the things I discovered in researching and writing this book was all the euphemisms that people would come up with to describe homosexuality, because even that word was considered, it was sort of taboo to mention it in polite company. And in fact, I read about the first outing in American politics, which was in 1942. It was of a Democratic senator from Massachusetts. His name was David Walsh, and he was accused by the New York Post of frequenting a male brothel right near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, with Nazi spies apparently were also hanging out at this male brothel, right? It was just in the early months of World War II. And it's important to note here that the New York Post at the time, and it might be hard for your listeners to imagine this, the New York Post was actually the liberal newspaper in New York City.
Right.
It wasn't until 1977, I believe, that Rupert Murdoch purchased it, and it became a conservative paper that we all know and love today. It was kind of a highbrow, it was the pro-FDR, pro-New Deal newspaper. And they outed Senator Walsh. They accused him of being at this brothel with a bunch of gay Nazi spies. And when the senators were debating this in the Senate chamber down in Washington, the Senate Majority Leader, he was referring to it, and he said that the Senator Walsh had been accused of a crime too loathsome to mention in the presence of ladies and gentlemen. All right, so that's like how they would talk about it. You know, obviously the love that dare not speak its name, you're familiar with that term. So there are all sorts of ways to describe this, which means that when you're a historian writing about something, you know, this was something that was covered up. It was, a lot of the evidence was, you know, destroyed, right? If someone was gay and they died, a lot of times their families would destroy the evidence. They'd destroy the diaries, the pictures. A lot of people didn't want to talk about it. So this subject was like hovering over American politics in the 20th century. I refer to it as the specter of homosexuality, and it influenced so many things, right? But you're right, because only now are we like now comfortable really talking about this. Did I feel that, you know, now is the time to like write this book? And did I think that it could actually be commercially successful? If I had published this book 15 years ago, not that long ago, I don't think it would have gotten the same sort of mainstream attention. It would have been kind of shunted to the, you know, the LGBTQ shelf in the bookstore. But now, you know, people really are interested in this.
Now there are no bookstores.
Yeah.
I think there's one still left on the Upper West Side, one Barnes and Noble still holding out against the future.
I have some related questions for you, and then we'll go back to the actual specifics. So I was having a talk with my kids the other day. I mean, they're pretty young for this talk, 10 and 9, but I was trying to you know, have them start thinking about what it's like to judge people in another time and place. And I had another adult there with me, and I said to her, it occurred to me, I said, you know, even in our own lifetime, if you think back on the way we referred to homosexuals, the way we openly made fun of them, the things that went on, it almost seems impossible that we did that, and yet it was just, you know, 25 years ago. So you can, so
less than that. I remember, I'm 38. I mean, I remember in high school, the word gay just like peppered our speech. Yeah. Every other, gay was basically the euphemism for bad or stupid, and everyone used it all the time.
But could you argue that they did not mean it in a homophobic way? They just meant it as a catch-all word.
Sometimes they meant it as a catch-all. Sometimes it was homophobic. But even if it was a catch-all, I mean, you wouldn't go around saying, you know, that's so Jew, right? Well, actually, we probably would, but that's, you know what I mean. You know what I mean? But I'm saying people don't do that anymore. Kids don't do that. We don't do that anymore. Kids don't do that.
My teacher, this was 1983, so a little bit further back than what you're discussing. I remember he said he was actually the cheerleading coach for the girls' cheerleading squad. So he was already a little suspect, but so he would say to the girls, "Oh, hey, so-and-so, you look good today." And these were freshman girls, and he was a 30-something-year-old man. And they would say, "Mr. Blank, you're such a perv." And he would say, "That's not perverted." If I said, "Dan, you look good," that would be perverted. In other words, being gay was perverted. But this was something that he said that you would never say today.
No, but I remember much harsher things. I mean, first of all, like the comedians, Eddie Murphy had a whole thing about faggot, forgive me.
Yeah.
And then, but I also remember, you know, people I knew who would talk about kicking the shit out of a gay guy if he looked at him the wrong way. And I even knew a story. It wasn't me. It was a brother of a girlfriend of mine who I think beat up a gay guy in the bathroom because the gay guy approached him or whatever, you know, and this was a story he would tell, not ashamed, you know, like, and I remember it horrified me at the time, but he had no sense that this was a story he should probably not want to share. Like he felt, and probably not incorrectly, that most people be like, yeah, I get that. You know, I get it, bro. You did what you had to do. So
it's funny. One of the anecdotes I tell in the book is Jack Kennedy. It's before he's president, and he's on the beach with Gore Vidal and Tennessee Williams, and they're sort of strolling behind him, and Tennessee Williams makes a comment about Jack Kennedy's ass to Gore Vidal, and they start laughing, and Jack Kennedy asks, "What are you laughing about?" And Gore Vidal tells him, and Jack Kennedy, he's kind of, flattered by it. He's sort of amused by it, which is very rare for a man of his time, right? This is 1960. And I think it says something about Jack Kennedy because we know his best friend was gay. And I write about this. His best friend from high school was gay. And Jack Kennedy was very relaxed around gay people in a way that really very few people of his generation were. And, I have theories as to why this might be the case. Obviously, his gay best friend, one might also speculate that he had his own secret sexual life that if the American public ever discovered it would be horrified. And so perhaps he felt some kind of, instinctual camaraderie with
Just
with
to
other
underline
men.
for the younger listeners, Jamie's referring to Jack Kennedy's affairs with women, not
Yes.
potentially homosexual secret life.
No, not that. Of course not.
Now, so maybe, well, no, you're 38, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you'd be older. What was it like for a gay person to live at that time and hear being gay openly be the butt of jokes and stuff like that? Did you just put it in some sort of context? Was it extremely painful? Did you internalize some of that self-hate in some way? What was it like?
I think what it did for me is it delays your coming out, so I didn't come out in high school. I went to an all boys high school, so that would have been a more difficult place. So I think it just puts up a barrier and it makes you not want to confront it or talk about those things. I think I had it relatively easy. I grew up in the Northeast. I had very accepting parents. I went to Yale, which was a very accepting place. So, my experience is, I should just be upfront about what my experience is like. And a lot of people don't have that experience, obviously. They come from parts of the country or families that are not as welcoming. But I have noticed, even in my, shorter life, have noticed a dramatic change. So much so that now when I look at the younger kids who are teenagers now, with the kind of proliferation of gender identities, it makes me a little uneasy, actually, because in some sense, I worry that homosexuality is being erased because gender nonconformity is now being conflated with sort of transgenderism. So if you understand what I'm saying, right? So like effeminate boys or masculine tomboy girls are being socialized into thinking that perhaps they are the opposite sex, as opposed to what in my generation, which is not that long ago, we would have understood as being, oh, he's probably going to grow up and be gay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, right? That's fine. But now there's this rush, I feel like, to kind of push people into a transgender identity. And I'm not denying transgenderism. It obviously exists, right? Mm-hmm. But I worry that the kind of differences between these are two totally different concepts. Homosexuality and transgender and gender identity are completely different things. One is same-sex attraction. The other is whether or not you identify as your sex. It's very inner directed. It has nothing to do with outer direction. So these are two separate concepts, and I think that they've become conflated. I don't know, this is a whole other can of worms that you've probably discussed before, but
well, we discussed it, carefully because, and that's I think the other part of this whole equation is that you're not allowed to kick these things around and say the wrong thing about it, which really makes it terrible. I just similarly on the way in, I was listening to Laura Bazelon, who is she's been on the show a few times, and she was being interviewed about her fighting for Title IX reform. And she said, my heart is pounding because I know I'm saying the wrong thing for my team. And I don't want it, like, it was clear. She was so worried about getting in trouble as she was merely saying what every defense attorney would think about due process. So this is somehow similar. Like, you have to be so careful about all these things. We don't know enough about, I'm going to go out alone. I don't think we know enough about transgenderism, if that's the right word, for people to be so fucking sure of themselves in the way they say what's wrong and what's correct and what's incorrect about it. We just don't know. That's all. There's no shame.
Yeah.
And the
I-
actions are permanent and serious. You know,
Yes.
these surgeries and never having an orgasm and things you read about.
Yeah.
So like, and I mean, I don't want to go off too far on this, but I happen to, just for some reason, I know some parents of transgender children. I know two different couples, extremely loving parents of these transgender children, and they struggle with this, and they struggle with the idea that they're not allowed, out of love for their children, to want to be cautious, to want to, you know, hear the devil's advocate position, you know. So this is, anyway, you're right, it's way off the subject.
Yeah.
But it's very apropos of our times. So give us some, what are, first of all, the open secrets. Was Eleanor Roosevelt a lesbian?
So, I mean, I didn't find anything new about that. So I just sort of report what's been written. Again, we're basing a lot of this on letters. It's all based on letters that she exchanged with another woman, Lorena Hickok, who was an Associated Press reporter who covered her. And the letters are a little, you know, they're quite hot and heavy in some places. But, you know, for me, that is not enough evidence, unless there's like an explicit mention of kind of, you know, sexual activity, or even, you know, strong emotional writing, right? I mean, you know, women in that era, or even today, women can write very emotional, women can express themselves very emotionally to one another, and not necessarily be gay. I think with men, we should be able to be as emotional with one another as women, but obviously the gender expectations, right, are that men are not supposed to be so
Well, it might be,
affectionate with one
it
another. And
might
if they
also be
are,
that men might not also have some sort of intrinsic lack of that kind of, I mean, it might partly be because of society, but it might be that just men are just less like that
Who knows?
with each other.
What about Abraham Lincoln?
Well, he was straight.
He had
less
letters
men
too,
or
right?
less. Well, Abraham Lincoln had letters, and there's also kind of doggerel poetry that he wrote that was very kind of homoerotic.
What does doggerel mean?
I
Shitty
mean, there's an
poetry.
entire
What means what?
Shitty poetry.
doggerel is just like kind of like dirty poetry, like
Oh, I
very
thought
like,
dogger
you know,
was just
off
bad
the cuff
poetry.
dirty
I'm going to look
poetry.
that up.
I think it means doggerel just means like you know, not exquisitely rhymed or anything, just sort of, you know, like limericks kind of, is like doggerel.
Poetry that is irregular in rhythm and
There's an entire
rhyme.
book.
Sorry, we have a bit. Our Zoom connection is not doing a good job of letting us both talk at the same time.
Oh.
Dan looked it up and said,
It said doggerel is poetry that is irregular in rhythm and in rhyme, often deliberately for burlesque or comic effect.
"Oh, so it's a perfect word." So go ahead.
He's
That
moving.
sounds correct. I'm moving closer to my router so that
That
doesn't
would
happen
probably
again.
be helpful. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
There's an entire book written about Abraham Lincoln potentially being gay, called The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he shared a bed with another man for several years. Again, this was not unusual on the American frontier in the middle of the 19th century. But again, you know, you read these letters and they are a little suspect. They do raise questions. But my book begins with FDR because World War II is really a very important moment when homosexuality is transformed from being, you know, merely a sin and a crime, and sorry, it's a sin, it's a crime, it is one other thing. I've been doing so many of these book talks, I can't.
It's okay.
It was a sin, it was a crime, and then it becomes a national security threat. Right up to that point, homosexuality might get you. Oh, sorry, it was also a medical condition, very important. Gay people, gay men, usually, if they were caught, they could be sent. Well, they would certainly go to see a psychiatrist. They would, in many cases, be sent to a hospital and undergo really what can only be described as torture. You know, castration in some cases, lobotomies, all sorts of kind of procedures that today we would consider barbaric. That's what you would suffer if you were gay. But World War II changes everything, and that suddenly we have this concept of national security, and secrecy becomes extremely important. And because gay people have this deep, dark, shameful secret that is the worst possible secret imaginable, it was believed that they could not be trusted right, with government secrets, that they would be prone to blackmail, to be, you know, turned by adversarial foreign powers.
Is that a ridiculous idea?
So, you know, it's not necessarily on its face if you're 1942 or the 1950s, right? That you might think, well, you know, you might think I'm a liberal progressive person. You know, I would like to live in a world where gay people are accepted. That's not the world we live in. This is a liability. And as long as we have this society where it's a liability, then we got to clear out these homosexuals. I'd say there's two problems with this. One is, if the government, you know, would have been willing at the time to, at least in the individual cases, to say, look, if a Soviet agent tries to blackmail you, come to us and tell us you're gay first, and we won't fire you, right? Don't give secrets. Come to us, we'll protect you. If they did that, then there wouldn't have been a need for this policy. And in fact, there's a case that I write about involving a journalist who did just that in 1957. He was in Moscow. His name was Joe Alsop. He was an extremely influential, well-known newspaper columnist. And the Soviets set him up in a hotel room with an attractive young man, took photographs, and they tried to turn him right then and there. And what Alsop did was he refused. Yeah, and he actually wrote a confession for the CIA, where he described the entire experience so that they could learn from it, right? And sort of protect other people in the field. And the second retort to your concern is that there actually was not a single case of a gay person being blackmailed because they were gay in the entire history of the United States. In the early 1990s, the Defense Department did a study of over 120 cases of espionage, American citizens convicted for espionage. 6 of them were gay, and not a single one of them did it because they were blackmailed. They did it for money or ideology, not because they were blackmailed. So there actually wasn't a single example of this ever happening. So it was an extremely wasteful, destructive policy that saw probably over 10 to 15,000 people lose their jobs. And I would say it's actually even worse than the Red Scare, because the Red Scare was at least predicated on something legitimate, which was a legitimate fear of communism, right? I mean, Joe McCarthy totally exaggerated it and he demagogued the issue. But there were a handful of communist spies in the US government in the late 1940s and early 1950s. There's, as I said, there was not a single example of a gay person who was a threat in this sense, right? And yet the government went to such extremes and wasted so many resources and denied the country so much talent, right? Because of this irrational fear that we can now look on as being an irrational fear. I tell a lot of the stories, you know, from my book. People laugh at them because they think they're so crazy. The things that people used to say and think about gay people. But these were widely believed, widely held.
Tell some of them. We have time. Go ahead.
I write about, you know, in the 1940s, it was widely believed that the Nazis were a sort of gay cabal. You know, this wasn't just a joke from the producers. Like, this was an actual belief. And it had, you know, I can explain why they thought this. Part of the reason is that there actually was one very well-known, high-ranking, openly gay Nazi. His name was Ernst Röhm. He was the head of the SA, the brown shirts. Those were like the real tough guys. He was gay and quite openly gay. And it wasn't until the Nazis came to power that Hitler actually went after him, right? So when the Nazis were just a street thug movement, Hitler was willing to tolerate the fact that his like chief thug was a pretty openly gay, you know, guy. But then once you're in power, you have to be respectable, right? And then there's, you know, just a year into power is the infamous Night of the Long Knives. And that's when Hitler basically he had Röhm murdered and all the leadership of the SA, because he saw them as a threat to his power. But afterwards, he cited the fact that Röhm was a homosexual and that there were other that he was kind of seeding the SA with other homosexuals. He cited that as the reason why he perpetrated the Night of the Long Knives. And then that kind of becomes the sort of accepted belief, right? Is that, oh, all these, well, you know, and there's other reasons too, right? I mean, what is fascism? What is Nazism? It's a very masculine ideology, right? And it's a masculinist, it's a masculine worshiping ideology. It's a lot of men in tough men in uniforms and boots and that kind
Also,
of
the uniforms were very, very well tailored.
yes, extremely well
I mean,
tailored.
they look good.
Hugo Boss.
Hugo Boss tailored them. I mean, but so we joke about this, but this was actually, so I'll say, in December, late December 1941, so just like 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, I found a memo from the OSS, which is the predecessor to the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services. It was a proposal from a researcher, a medical researcher in New York who worked for an institute that studied what they called sexual variants, basically anyone who wasn't a heterosexual, homosexuals. And this man was proposing that the OSS recruit what he called patriotic homosexuals to then infiltrate the Nazi command, right? Because they couldn't serve in the military officially, although lots of gay people served in World War II in the military. That the OSS should recruit some of these gay men, and because the Nazis were just a bunch of gay men, then you could infiltrate them as lovers and spies, and kind of figure out what the Nazis were doing. This was a serious proposal. The OSS didn't act on it, to my knowledge, but they entertained it. And then just a couple of years later, Joe McCarthy, just a couple of weeks into his reign of terror, he's accusing the State Department of being riddled with homosexual communists. And the allegation is made that there are, lesbians performing secret, like erotic sexual performances to seduce female government workers, like into the kind of Soviet sphere. I mean, these are just crazy things, right? That, during World War II, you could accuse gay people of being Nazis, and then just a few years later, you're accusing them of being communists, and there's no cognitive dissonance here. Basically, anything that was terrible, you could pin on the gays. And I mean, I don't know. You've probably seen the movie JFK by Oliver Stone.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but that movie basically alleges that it was a homosexual conspiracy, a right-wing homosexual conspiracy that assassinated John F. Kennedy. And that movie is based on a real prosecution. In 1967, the only person ever prosecuted for the assassination of John F. Kennedy was a gay businessman named Clay Shaw in New Orleans. He's played by Tommy Lee Jones in that movie in a very homophobic manner. And the man who prosecuted him was a totally reckless, out of control district attorney named Jim Garrison, who's played by Kevin Costner. And basically the crux of his theory was that there was this group of right-wing homosexuals in New Orleans who were upset with JFK because he botched the Bay of Pigs. And they wanted to assassinate, and I'm quoting him, they wanted to assassinate the most handsome man in the world in a homosexual thrill killing, like Leopold and Loeb. Leopold and Loeb, the two kind of gay lovers who killed one of their cousins. It was a sensational murder case in the 1920s. He was basically alleging that this was what the Kennedy assassination was. And he said that Jack Ruby and Oswald were lovers. I mean, this was a crazy, crazy thing. Most people don't know this or remember this, but this is what JFK, this is the story and the theory that Oliver Stone based his multiple Academy Award nominated movie on. I mean, it's actually, look, in terms of filmmaking, it's brilliant filmmaking. I could watch that movie over and over again. The editing, the score, the acting. I mean, it's just an incredible movie. It also happens to be probably the most homophobic movie ever made. But it just kind of shows you throughout history all the ways in which homosexuality becomes.
Speaking of homophobic movies, I saw on YouTube a public service announcement from, I think, the 50s, basically warning children about gay men. And it was pretty horrifying. It was like, what Johnny doesn't know is that this kind man is sick, but it's not a sickness you can see. It's a sickness of the mind. And the kid gets like murdered by the guy, implying that, gay men are not just preying on kids sexually, but violent, so.
It's called Boys Beware. You can watch it online. It was a public service announcement. Like they showed, like those those old, PSAs that they would show during, telling kids to duck and cover, right? When the nuclear holocaust happened. So that's kind of how gays were treated, right? They were sort of the equivalent of a Soviet nuclear bomb, right? I mean, it was that same kind of tone that they were described as. I mean, it's a short movie, but imagine growing up in that kind of America and being gay.
Well, I just looked up what I was just looking up on my phone was to confirm that it was in 1975 that the American Psychological Association finally took away considering homosexuality as a mental illness, right?
I think it was 73.
Yeah.
American Psychiatric Association. Yeah, right. Where it's almost 50 years ago.
I don't know if they meant it or they just did it for political pressure.
Well, they were under pressure. But it's not like they had to do it. I mean, it's not like today where everyone goes out of their way, to be seen as LGBT friendly. There wasn't a cost for this kind of homophobia. There was no cost, and there was everything to be gained, by the way. And in fact, I wouldn't say that calculus really changed until very recently. I mean, I look at someone like Pete Buttigieg. I think you can fairly say that being gay helped him, I think. I don't think if he was a straight, white, Harvard-educated former McKinsey consultant who's the mayor of whatever.
South Bend.
Yeah, I don't think he would have been, put it this way, I don't think he'd be cabinet secretary, right? I'm not denying his talents, right? I'm not trying to take anything away from him. But I think his experience as a gay man in politics is very different from, Barney Frank. I think Barney Frank could have been Speaker of the House, right? He's an extremely smart and witty guy. But I think being gay probably,
Buttigieg is a lot handsomer than Barney Frank, if memory serves.
Well, I'm not going to get into that. But I just think it's a lot easier to be gay now in politics because of people like Barney Frank.
Well, he had a scandal, right? Barney Frank.
He did. Yes, he did. He had a male prostitute living in his house, and he fixed some.
That's none of anybody's business, actually.
What accounts for this change? I mean, is it fair to say that just that human beings evolve? Once we thought black people were only fit to be slaves, now we don't. Is it a natural evolution that now we regard LGBTQ as our equals? I mean, what or is there something that happened that you can point?
Normal. Yeah.
I think there's a few things, and one is there's an important difference with race, is that gay people are randomly and evenly distributed across the population. So everyone has a gay friend or family member at this point. We always did, by the way. It's only because gay people came out of the closet, right, that we now all suddenly realize this. But once that happened, once gay people started coming out in larger numbers, and the percentage of Americans who could say that they knew an openly gay person went from 1% to
everybody.
Now it's 94%, right? Once that happens, it becomes extremely difficult to discriminate against gay people, right? When they're in your family, when they're your coworkers, when they're your friends. And that is why I think gay people have made more progress than racial minorities, because not everyone has someone of a different race in their family. And so that it's easier to live a life where you don't encounter people of different races, and it's easier to kind of other. I don't like that term as a verb. It's easier to other them, right, than it is when there's a potential that your son could be gay.
But in order to get to that point, we had to have these people come out. So what precipitated that?
So what that is, I argue, well, first, it takes a very small group of extremely courageous people to be the first, right? And one of the stories I tell is of a man named Frank Kameny, who was a Harvard-trained PhD astronomer who was working for the Army Map Service, which is the predecessor to the Geospatial Intelligence Agency, basically the military wing of the space program. And he's working for them in December 1957. It's just 2 months after the launch of Sputnik and the space race begins. He is recalled from the observatory that he's working at in Hawaii. He's called all the way back to Washington, and he's fired because the government finds evidence that he's gay. And he becomes the first person to say, who's fired by the government, to say, you know what, I'm going to challenge this. I'm going to legally challenge this. And it's an incredible moment, because what he's basically doing is saying, I'm not sick. You're all sick. The society is sick. And it's incredible. I mean, he tries to get the ACLU to take his case, and not even the ACLU would take his case. Now, I have lots of problems with the ACLU today, and I think we've talked about them before on this podcast. But back then, the job of the ACLU was to defend, everyone, no matter how disreputable or unpopular they were. And this goes to the point I was making earlier about why it was worse to be a homosexual than a communist. The ACLU defended communists, or people accused of communism, or certainly people with left-wing sympathies who were fired from their jobs. They wouldn't take Frank Kammeny's case. He had to do it all by himself. He had no legal training, right? He had to kind of become an autodidact, write his own legal brief. He tries to appeal his case up to the Supreme Court. They don't take it. But he then forms really the first, substantial gay rights organization in the United States. He founds it here in Washington, called the Mattachine Society. And they hold the first picket for gay rights outside the White House in 1965. So that's 4 years before Stonewall, the Stonewall uprising, which we've all been, led to believe was kind of the first event in the history of gay rights. I actually say it didn't start in New York. It started in Washington earlier. And you can see these photographs of these men and women. They're all dressed up in suits and ties, and the women are all wearing, blouses and skirts that go below the knee. Frank was insistent that he said, if you want to be employed, look employable. And they're standing outside the White House holding up these picket signs, like, African-American civil rights demonstrators, with very simple demands, right? Homosexuals demand equal rights. That takes so much courage.
Oh, yeah.
To do that in 1965. And all these people, there's video, there's film of it. And all these people looking at them like they're zoo animals, like to actually declare yourself a homosexual in public. This is so crazy, right? So you have people like that who are heroes and just incredible. And it's kind of unfathomable how they had that kind of courage. And then they open the door slightly, right? And then you have Stonewall a couple of years later, and Stonewall becomes news across the country, right? And you can imagine there are people living in cities in the Midwest, right, who are reading this newspaper item, maybe on page A5 or something, homosexuals riot. It's like, oh, like we're not just going to get beat up by the cops all the time now. We're actually going to fight back. So it's a gradual process. But at the heart of it, I really believe, is the First Amendment and free speech, because the first gay rights case before the Supreme Court, it involves a gay magazine, just like a general interest magazine. It's not pornographic by any means. It was deemed obscene by the Postal Service. They wouldn't send it. They impounded it, right? They sued and they won. And they won on the First Amendment, on First Amendment grounds. You have Frank Kameny, who I just talked about, right? He is writing letters to congressmen. He's protesting outside the State Department, the White House, the Civil Service Commission. You have gay people, writing. They're exercising their First Amendment liberties, and I think that's really at the heart of it. I mean, being gay, the whole act of coming out of the closet is an act of expression, right? So all of this freedom that gay people enjoy is bound up in the First Amendment and freedom of expression. And it's important to remember that, the First Amendment was designed for people like this. Gay people were the most despised minority in the country. They were criminals. They were insane. They were lobotomized. They were, they could be banned from teaching in public schools. They could be fired at will.
It seems from my point of view that there was this gradual progress, and then with gay marriage, it just accelerated by a factor of 100 or something. That really seemed to, and I didn't see that coming. It's, I like to think I'm that I'm smart, I guess. And from time to time, I get something so wrong, and it always stays with me. And that is something I did not see that coming. And boy, was I wrong about it. As soon as people started going to their friends' marriages, or knowing that their friends were getting married, and seeing gay people live like they, just live ordinary, mundane kind of lives, right?
Yeah.
This seemed to really grab people in a way that I think Andrew Sullivan saw it. I think some people, with deep insight did understand that could be what would happen. I did not see that. I don't know if you saw it coming.
I think we saw it as an ideal. I don't think we saw it arriving so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember one of the first realizations I had when I was gay was that I would never be able to get married when I was like a teenager. That's like, I'm not going to get married. And I've talked to other gay people who had that same,
right,
feeling, and how quickly that changed, right? Like maybe we'd be accepted, right? But we'd never be able to get married. Like that would just never be an option.
Or have kids, right? Like a lot.
Or have kids. Well, I don't know if I want to have kids. I mean, you can keep the straight people can have the kids.
Well, no, I think there are a lot of gay couples.
No, there are, and I respect
No,
them.
no.
And everyone should have. Of course, I'm not disparaging people who do that. I'm just saying personally, it's not for me.
By the way, speaking of kids, I would imagine, I try to put myself in the position of others, that your parents must feel emotional almost to see how the world has changed to accept their son. They, even more than you might be thankful for it. For a parent, this must be very, very emotional.
Well, my mother listens to every podcast I do, so it's too bad these aren't live because she'd call in and probably confirm that for you. Maybe you can have her on as a guest sometime.
We can call her right now.
We don't have a phone. I would love to. Go ahead.
I think she would agree with you. I also think that's why Pete Buttigieg got like so many moms of gay sons supporting him. I think that was a huge constituency for him. But yeah, no, I do. I do think that for the parents of gay children, that's a huge part of why this change happened, by the way. It's not just the gay people who affected it. It's their relatives. It's their mothers, really.
It would have been my father.
It's the Jewish mothers of gay kids.
So before we have a few more minutes, let's talk about the part of your identity that will never be accepted. There's a lot of Jewish stuff in the news. Like who would have thought it would become easier to be gay than Jewish? But two things happened in the news recently. One is that our brother comedian Sam Morril. Did you see this? He was doing a show.
No.
And Dan, you want to describe what happened?
He was doing a show in Omaha, Nebraska, at the Funny Bone, and some woman at some point I think he did a joke about being Jewish, but Sam Morril does not take a stand politically on anything, I don't think. I mean, from what I know.
No, absolutely not.
And certainly not in Israel-Palestine. But there was a woman there that I guess knew that he was a Jewish comedian and decided to heckle him and said, "Free Palestine." And then, said something else about apartheid and whatever. And Sam was just like, why are you saying this is the Funny Bone? Well, it's really not the place to do that. But
basically just attacking him for
attacking
being
him
Jewish.
basically for being Jewish, even though he's never expressed any, I mean, I could understand them doing it to me because I have tweeted things about Israel-Palestine, but nobody knows who I am. So Sam's a bit more well-known. So, but he doesn't say anything about Israel-Palestine either on Twitter or anywhere else. So this was kind of outrageous that they did.
So she said, "I'm taking a stance against apartheid," and Sam goes, "Well, what's your stance about fucking up my show?"
Yeah. And when she said apartheid, she means Israeli apartheid. So yeah, and it's just, this is the one. My father used to say that anti-gay bigotry is the one accepted bigotry. He would complain about that. That it was the one bigotry you were still openly allowed to express. But no longer. I think if a gay comedian was attacked on stage about being gay, that would be viral in this year. But a Jewish comedian attacked on stage is not. It will not get the attention that any other group would. I don't think, because they hide behind Israel.
Well, also because Jews are sort of, if you want to put the best possible spin on it, Jews are considered a group that's in power, basically a white adjacent. And if she had said "fuck white people," that wouldn't be considered scandalous either. So in a way, I think that's
Dan's an apologist for the anti-Semites. You can hear that.
Apologist. I'm saying if Jews are basically considered white people, then it's open season because you can make fun of.
We're also the #1 victims of violent hate crimes in America. Come on.
But that may well be,
Yeah.
but I think we're perceived by many people as powerful people that
Well, we are that too. Gay people can be anyway. So that was one thing that happened. And then the other thing is this 9 different groups on at Berkeley. Do you have any comment on that? 9 different groups at Berkeley, campus groups, said they will never have a speaker who was a Zionist at any of their functions. And this is not, I believe I'm correct here, not to speak about Israel, to speak about anything. You can't come and speak about physics if we know that you're a Zionist.
Well, I think that's just a further sign of the kind of the decline of American higher education. There are many other examples and ways in which this is happening. The quality of what's being taught and the quality of the students. It's just in general decline. I think American higher education is, not. I think it's just not worth the money we're pouring into it. It's become corrupted. It's become politicized. And this is just one facet of it, is the anti-Semitism.
And to harken back to sorry to interrupt, but to harken back to something you said before, I don't think the ACLU is going to care about this case. I think they would care if somebody said we're not going to, somehow they could make it a gay thing.
Interesting.
It's changed. And let me just say, just to because people may roll in their eyes, I do not think that my life as a Jew is difficult in America. I kiss the ground of this country and don't think I think like we Jews really have it tough. So, I'm not saying that. Nevertheless, I do worry very much. I've said this a lot of times. So when I was in college, I took a semester abroad in Tel Aviv, and it was fun. I told everybody it was like very open about it, and we had. I believe that if my kids were in college now and they wanted to take a semester in Tel Aviv, it'd be the kind of things they would kind of keep to themselves. A lot of people will look down their nose on, and I feel like any Jew who is identifies with Israel or things like it's kind of being made into an Afrikaner.
Yeah.
And I don't want that for my children. It bothers me very much. They'll still have a very nice life in America, but that moving backwards in terms of us being able to be, proud, I guess is the word, or just not to be connected with who we are, and it is degrading. And I don't know what else to say about it. It bothers me very deeply.
Well, one is you have to point out that the Jews who are facing the real brunt of this anti-Semitism, the violent anti-Semitism, are the Orthodox, right? The visible Jews. And you and I are not necessarily, well, Dan might be. He's got a pretty big schnoz, but most of us are not. Most of us are not necessarily.
I didn't see that coming.
Go ahead.
We're not necessarily visible on the street as Jews, and so
I am. But go ahead.
Right. So that's yes, you and I, the 4 of us could say it's not tough for us, but you know what? If you're a Hasid in Brooklyn, the story is not so nice, right?
Well, I will say that, this woman on a plane once thought I was Italian and
she was blind.
She was very friendly. I don't believe she was blind. She was very, we were in an exit row. She can't be blind.
And you know what? I would actually say, yeah, you know what? You're right. Jews are, maybe we make more money and we dominate, or we're more heavily represented in certain professions. I think when anti-Semitism takes on in a society, and when it spreads, and when it goes unacknowledged, or it's not criticized, that has really bad repercussions for the entire society, and not just the Jews. It's a cancer. It'll eat that society and destroy it, because it's a sign of irrationality, of conspiracy theories, of unreason, of just backwardness in general, right? So when stuff like this is happening on the Berkeley campus, that's a really bad sign for Berkeley as an institution, not just the Jews. It's a bad sign. Yeah.
I remember the other thing I that escaped me. It's that, and I see, and this, I don't want this for my children either, I see American Jews becoming more and more embarrassed and disconnected from Israel, less and less able to defend Israel, and more just falling in line with this position that Israel is an apartheid state and all that stuff. So as my kind of pithy thing that I said one time, when anti-Semitism comes from the right, it rallies us. Jews will stand up to that. But when it comes from the left, it rots us.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm more concerned about the rotting within the community that's going on, and it's clearly going on, than I am about an America that's going to become difficult for Jews day to day. It's just that we are that's exactly the right word. We're rotting. And we want to be accepted in polite company and among progressives and blah, blah, blah. And all these little things are making that you need to be brave again. Like you talked about this man who had this bravery to be a pro-Israel person now requires bravery. And I'll tell you one other thing, and then I'll shut up. In the front of the olive tree, there's a Star of David. It's like a stained glass Star of David. You've been to the olive tree. I don't know if you remember it. It's from an old synagogue. It's been there basically my whole life. In the last 3 or 4 years, more people have commented to me about it. Wow, that's pretty brave of you. Wow, I'm impressed that you have a Star of David than in all the rest of my life combined.
I'll tell you why that is.
This was something that nobody ever commented on before. And all of a sudden, the ground has shifted, and people are seeing this as a defiant political act on my part.
I think the Star of David is linked to the flag of Israel. If it was a menorah or a shofar,
yes, it is. But I'm saying that it didn't used to. Nobody used to care about it, and now the climate is such that people see a Star of David in my restaurant. I'm like, wow, you got an axe to grind. Maybe like you're not afraid of anything, right? You're in their face. Because it's not so socially acceptable anymore. That's terrible. That's painful to me.
Do you have anything you would like to say in conclusion about your children's education that you had? You talked to me last night about what they're learning in school, and
no, I don't want to talk about that. I'll talk about that with Jamie sometime. So leave us with one good anecdote that people will be amazed to hear about a prominent gay situation.
The craziest story I uncovered in the book is there was an attempt just a couple of weeks before Ronald Reagan was nominated by the Republican Party for president in 1980. There was an attempt by a small group of congressmen who were liberal to moderate. They didn't like Reagan. And they went to Ben Bradley with a dossier supposedly containing all this evidence that Ronald Reagan was being controlled by a right-wing homosexual anti-communist cabal of advisors, and that Reagan himself might have been gay. They didn't really have definitive evidence of that. It was hearsay, but they were pretty certain that Reagan was being controlled by this right-wing homosexual cabal. And I found all the notes of this investigation in Ben Bradley's papers, where they'd just been sitting for years. The Post never actually published anything about it, obviously, or else, you would have heard about it. So
let me finish. Go ahead, finish.
So I uncovered this story, and it's a kind of wacky, it's a wacky story that we kind of laugh at when I tell you the details today. But it was considered serious enough that Ben Bradley assigned, Bob Woodward, among other reporters, to investigate this. That's kind of how serious these accusations were, right? That a leading presidential candidate might have a couple of gay men working for him was considered legitimately scandalous.
What is your take on Reagan and his moral flaws vis-a-vis reacting to the AIDS virus in real time? I'm sure you know all about that.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the book, obviously. I think what makes it look, Ronald Reagan didn't utter the word AIDS until September 1985. AIDS was first reported on the front page of the New York Times in July 1981. So imagine going for 4 years of a disease that is killing people in pretty excruciating ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Across the country and then around the world. And then the president doesn't even mention it. That tells you a lot.
Hundreds of thousands of gay men died.
I do remember.
I mean, not in that period. I mean, over time, yes. In those 4 years, I think by the time he mentioned it, it's in my book. It may have been like 25,000 people had died over the course. It was a lot of people, right? And I can tell you, if they were little schoolgirls, the president would have been on it, right? But they were homosexuals, and they were intravenous drug users, and they were Haitians. So these were not people who were considered part of Reagan's America. Okay.
You see this as his betraying his personal anti-gay feelings, or it's just
Well,
politics?
not
or
necessarily,
only-
actually. No, I say this in the book. I don't think Reagan was more homophobic than men of his generation. He was born in 1911, right?
It's Hollywood too, so he must have had some experience.
Well, so there's actually a story I tell. A movie he was in with Betty Davis called Dark Victory, and the director. This was 1939, and the director, who was a bisexual Englishman, basically wanted him to play the role of Betty Davis's gay best friend. But he, in so many words, and we know this because the way Reagan described it to his biographer many years later, he said he wanted me to play the role as if he was the sort of guy who could sit in the girls' dressing room and dish with the ladies while they're getting dressed. Right? That's a euphemistic way of describing a homosexual, right? Yeah. And Reagan was really kind of put off by this. He did not like the idea of playing a kind of sissy, right? Or a fop.
Yeah, it wouldn't be good for his career, obviously.
Well, maybe, yes, perhaps you're always so charitable with these homophobes. I mean, I understand it. Yeah, so you're right. I mean, you wouldn't want to be typecast.
I mean,
right?
when Will Smith finally did it, it was considered very controversial for him, right? And that was much, much later.
When did he play? In 6 Degrees
of Separation.
Separation.
Yeah.
But so Reagan came from this. But this is another reason why that story I just told you about the crazy Reagan advisors being gay. I think it's important because Reagan he had this Hollywood background. He was already under suspicion from people from the Christian right. He and Nancy had a ton of gay friends. Nancy in particular, she was known as the first fag hag, just surrounded by gay men, right?
Wow, is that true?
Yeah. Oh, there's a whole, in the photo insert in my book, there's an entire page. And it's just photographs of Nancy with all of her gay courtiers and designers and hairdressers. And it says all the first ladies' men. That's the caption. Then when Reagan was governor, there was actually a gay scandal in his office. He fired 2 men who had been accused of being gay, right? So he has all this kind of, I refer to it as kind of a homosexual aura, swirling around him when he's president. And most Americans might not have seen it or known it, but I do believe that he and Nancy and his advisors in particular were sort of like sufficiently paranoid by this, that when this disease just came out of nowhere and it's like gay men whom it's killing, he did not want to be associated with it. And in fact, one of the other real dramatic finds in my book is I found the original draft of the statement that he and Nancy released upon the death of Rock Hudson.
Wow, I was just going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I don't know if buy the book, right? And you can see it. I reproduced it in the book, and it's just a 3 or 4 sentence statement. Because Rock Hudson, by the way, famous actor, matinee idol, he becomes really the first public figure to die of AIDS and was close friends of the Reagans. The Reagans put out a statement, and you can see in Ronald's handwriting, he's removing like little words and phrases that indicate their connection to Rock Hudson. So like there's an entire sentence that's deleted that says, he was a close friend of ours and we will miss him greatly. It's crossed out and it's changed to, he was a wonderful man and like he will be missed. It's put in the passive voice. And there's other examples, and it's very deliberate, and it's in the president's own handwriting. Right. So it's a fascinating example of kind of how particular he was in trying to erase in the public perception this, close friendship that him and his wife had.
Let me tell you what I kind of think about it. You tell me if this is too charitable. Yeah. And I know we really do have to go. So politicians are cowards, right? So obviously the fact that he had many gay friends and certainly knew that Rock Hudson was gay and was close with him, that says something about how much he cared personally about it. And I would make the analogy now to Senator Schumer, who was always very, very critical of Hamas, but in the last Gulf War would not say a goddamn thing about Hamas, wouldn't tweet about it, nothing, right? So do I think that Chuck Schumer is personally sympathetic to Hamas? No. Do I think he's just a cowardly politician? And that's its own immorality or whatever you want to say, but that's the politics. And that is what I see as Reagan vis-a-vis the gay thing. And people want to add to that that he was anti-gay. And to me, I don't think Schumer's anti-Jewish. He just doesn't give a shit enough. He doesn't give a shit about anything more than getting reelected.
I do
That's-
think, didn't Reagan say,
That's how I see it.
in terms of Reagan being homophobic, I seem to remember vaguely a quote of Reagan where he said something like, isn't it interesting when morality and good sense go in the same direction or something like that? With
Well, no,
regard-
there's actually, well, there was I didn't mention it, but in 1978, just 2 years before he ran for president, there was a ballot initiative in the state of California to ban gay people from teaching in public schools.
Anita Bryant, right?
And, well, she was involved, and it was called the Briggs Initiative. It was a state senator, John Briggs, and it was going to pass until Reagan came out against it on very kind of libertarian conservative grounds. He said this is a violation of individual rights. It's a violation of privacy. It's also going to just rain havoc in the public school system. You're going to have all these kids, making up accusations, accusing their teachers of being gay because they're angry about, bad grades. It'll be chaos. It'll, the lawyers will make up, like what you would expect from a kind of libertarian small government guy. And his intervention defeated that measure.
I found the quote that I was referring to. It
Go
said,
ahead.
when it comes to preventing AIDS, don't medicine and morality teach the same lessons? So in other words, he's saying that morality, that getting AIDS is due to immoral behavior.
Well, you could make, the charitable, I'll make the Noam case, would
I
maybe
know what
be,
you're gonna, I know what you're gonna
well,
say.
maybe don't be so promiscuous or have safe sex, practice safe sexual practices, perhaps.
Because at the same time, I remember having lived with that we were told over and over that this was not a gay thing, that straight
Right.
people could get it. And I can remember only the National Review, I remember, had an article which said, this is ridiculous. It's almost 100% in the gay community
Yeah.
and heroin. And I would show it to people and they'd be like, this is some anti-gay nonsense.
No.
So
I would
in
just,
that context, I don't know what Reagan meant by that.
I would just like to go on record, since I'm sitting here, and say that I think Reagan was fully aware of how insidious his position was.
But as I say, you're not burdened by any actual knowledge.
Well, as I've said before, that has not hindered me in the past.
Look, I'm charitable with most of these politicians and most people, because there's few villains, especially partisan villains, who are actually as personally horrible as their detractors make them out to be. And, I think that there's a lot of evidence that Reagan was a good man, also a good man of his time, and also a politician, and politicians make compromises. But the fact that he came out against this initiative,
Okay, that's one thing, though.
you would think that would get him, because that took some
Okay, listen.
courage in some way. You would think that would get him a little context, like,
Okay, first of all, I
would
like that.
hold on, would that be what a guy who hated gays would have done?
I don't know what his agenda is with that, and I'm not so quick to
You're
give him
you're
a.
skeptical,
I am skeptical, and I
because you
do
think
like.
that Jamie probably doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, that's not true. And I like your turn of phrase, burdened by knowledge. I think that's cute. But also, if you're familiar with any of Larry Kramer's work, which I am,
I'm not.
well, you should be before you make snarky comments. I think that Reagan, the onus really is on him, and you shouldn't be so charitable.
Fair enough. I'm not burdened by knowledge either. Jamie, I love having you on the show. I'm always happy to see you in person too. And
Yes,
I'm
we
also
want you in person.
thank you for your comedian recommendations as well. That worked out very, very well. All right, so that's it. We got to go.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Buy the book. Secret
Oh, yeah.
City, Gay Washington.
Secret City available on
Everywhere.
everywhere.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.